Yes, the white matter of the spinal cord is concerned with sending action potentials up to and out from the brain. But the spinal cord makes a lot of decisions for you all of the time. These reactions to stimuli, they're called reflexes, spinal reflexes. They're spinal reflexes because the only neurons that participate are in the spinal cord. This diagram, it puts together many of the things that we have been talking about in drawing. The blue neuron here is a unipolar sensory neuron, right? Look at its shape and look at where its cell body is in the dorsal root ganglion. Look at how it synapses in gray matter of the dorsal horn with a green neuron. And this green neuron is an interneuron that exists only within the central nervous system. It's this interneuron that makes the decision that you are burning your hand and that you need to withdraw said hand from hot and painful stimulus. That stimulus is felt by nociceptors and thermoreceptors in your somatic tissues. So this interneuron synapses with this orange neuron, which is a somatic motor neuron. And this orange neuron is going to go all the way to the neuromuscular junction in your hand muscles. You know, each of these components gets a specific name when we talk about a spinal reflex. Officially, there are 5 parts of a spinal reflex. There is a receptor, such as the nociceptors here and the thermoceptors in our example. There is a sensory neuron, which is the blue unipolar neuron in our example. There's an interneuron, which is the green neuron encased fully within the gray matter of the spinal cord. And then there's an efferent neuron, which is our orange neuron, carrying motor information all the way to the effectors. And here, our effector, which is a word that we heard back when we were talking about negative feedback, our effectors here are the skeletal muscles of the hand. It is the effector that reverses the stimulus. So in our example, skeletal muscle of the hand is capable of removing the hand from the hot cup and stopping the stimulus. We just looked at a polysynaptic spinal reflex. A polysynaptic spinal reflex has at least 2 synapses and therefore at least 3 neurons, so more than 2 neurons. There are simpler spinal reflexes, which are referred to as monosynaptic, and these have 2 neurons and 1 synapse. The example that we use that you see here is also an example of an ipsilateral spinal reflex, where all of the neurons, sensory and motor, are located only on one side of the spinal cord, and there's no communication to the other side. In contrast to that, there are contralateral spinal reflexes where the white matter decusses across one of the commissures of the spinal cord, bringing information to the other side of the body. So it is possible to experience a stimulus on the left side of your body and evoke an effector that's on the right side. The withdrawal reflex is actually quite a simple reflex. It allows you to withdraw yourself from a painful, noxious, or just simply damaging stimulus, which is what this lightning bolt represents up here. The withdrawal reflex is monosynaptic with only 1 sensory neuron and 1 motor neuron, right? So that makes it monosynaptic, and it has a total of 2 neurons. The sensory neuron detects the stimulus or threat. So let's have a picture of it detecting the stimulus or threat. And then it sends an action potential to the gray matter of the spinal cord. associated, the spinal segment associated with the threat. So this sensory neuron then synapses directly with a motor neuron that leaves and innervates the muscle in order to create that withdrawal reflex. Motor neurons will come out of the spinal segment that innervates the flexors that help you withdraw the stimulus, such as the biceps brachii, which is pictured here. This reflex is named for that withdraw action that flexors can create. This is also a life-saving reflex. It allows your body to withdraw from a harmful stimulus without you having to consciously register the stimulus. At the same time as the flexors are contracting, actually the extensors are being inhibited. This inhibition guarantees the quickest and strongest withdrawal reflex. There's one more modification to a withdrawal reflex that makes it difficult to understand than the extensor reflex. Information about the event with a withdrawal reflex is usually somehow carried up to the brain by way of a third interneuron. And this is what makes you consciously aware of the stimulus while your unconscious reflex is helping you to withdraw. One of the most common extensor reflexes that's commonly tested is called the patellar reflex. There's a tiny sensory structure right here near your tibial tuberosity that contains what is called a Golgi tendon organ, or I've heard it called a Golgi tendon receptor. When stimulated with a reflex hammer, this receptor then sends that sensation by way of a unipolar neuron with its cell body in the dorsal root ganglion. It sends that sensation to the gray matter of the spinal cord. There in the gray matter, this sensory neuron synapses with interneurons. I'm just going to draw two of them right there to set things up. The interneurons will then synapse with multipolar motor neurons that will leave the spinal cord by way of the spinal nerve. But it's these interneurons that are taking in the sensory information and determining the appropriate output. The motor neurons, they innervate the muscle that's attached to the tendon in which the Golgi tendon organ was found. And the motor neurons, they activate the rectus femoris. So let's innervate the rectus femoris. They activate the rectus femoris, and that contraction allows you to kick the knee out and extend it outward. But at the same time, the knee flexors on the other side, on the posterior side of the thigh, such as the semitendinosus or the semimembranosus, those knee flexors are also innervated. However, they are being inhibited. So there's a dual action here of activating muscle and inhibiting its antagonist to get the best extension possible. The crossed extensor reflex is a reflex that has both an ipsilateral and a contralateral response, controlling muscles on both sides of the body. So this reflex doesn't just activate muscles, it also inhibits muscles too. And finally, we're going to discover that it is absolutely a polysynaptic reflex. There are lots of neurons here. Let's start with the sensory neuron over here in the right arm. It seems that it has a tactile receptor on it. And this tactile receptor senses something in the outside environment and generates an action potential that will run through this unipolar sensory neuron to the spinal cord. And I'm going to put the cell body right in there. For example, let's say that your spouse is going into the crawl space to find a suspected rabid raccoon. Not like this has ever happened to me, but your spouse reaches out with their right hand and is promptly bitten by said raccoon. And right away, your spouse pulls away their right arm from the rabid raccoon, but they also have an that is the ipsilateral response because it's on the same side as the stimulus. That is that life-saving withdrawal reflex. But your spouse extends their left arm in order to brace themselves from falling backwards, but it's too late. And as your spouse falls backwards, they twist their outstretched left wrist. Now, your spouse not only has rabies, but also has a broken wrist. But the outstretched left arm, that was a contralateral response because it involved the left arm and the stimulus was on the right or on the opposite side. Okay, so now that we've established the contralateral, which is over here, and the ipsilateral responses, which are over here, let's look at how it activates and inhibits the muscles. On the side, ipsilateral to the stimulus, which is our right side in this example, we're going to have to draw a withdraw reflex because your spouse is pulling their arm away from the rabid raccoon. So in this ipsilateral arm, we would want to activate flexors and inhibit extensors. And since this is an arm, that means that we're going to activate the biceps brachii. So let's draw a neuron that will actually do that. It is innervating the biceps brachii, and it will cause flexion, and it will also activate flexion. We also want to inhibit the triceps brachii, which is the main extensor of the arm. So we need another neuron for that. And by inhibiting the extensors, we get a more powerful withdrawal. So let's draw another neuron here that goes to your triceps brachii. And this neuron here is focused on inhibiting extension. Okay, so that's the ipsilateral side. But the contralateral side to the stimulus, or the left side in our example, we have to activate the extensors and inhibit the flexors. We're still dealing with the same two muscles on the arm of the biceps brachii, which is the flexor, and the triceps brachii, which is the extensor. We're still using those, but now we're looking at them on the contralateral side. So there's a neuron coming from the spinal cord that is activating the biceps brachii, and let's activate. It's not a great drawing, is it? Okay, well, there is a neuron coming from the spinal cord that's activating the extensors for the triceps brachii, and there's another neuron that is coming from the spinal cord that is inhibiting this biceps brachii. So we're going to activate extensors, and we're going to inhibit flexors. So we've done this example with the arms, but I would like for you to think about what might happen if you stepped on a piece of glass. You would withdraw the foot that you stepped on the piece of glass with, but you would also activate the extensors in the opposite leg to brace yourself from falling down, right? So my spouse reaching out with their left arm was a reflex trying to stabilize them from falling, and this is why he broke his left wrist. Again, not that that happened. So this reflex is it's kind of complicated, right? And to make it even more complicated, we do have multiple sets of neurons, interneurons, bringing information across the spinal cord in one of those gray commissures, but also bringing information up to your conscious brain by way of a sensory pathway. So this reflex is a great example of contralateral and ipsilateral. And this reflex addresses activation and inhibition. And finally, this reflex, it is absolutely polysynaptic because it involves way more than two neurons.